Welcome to the SAS Visual Analytics Data Discovery session. We're going to spend a little time taking a look at using SAS Visual Analytics to understand our data better, to look for those trends in our data. We'll also touch briefly on reporting, since probably when you find those trends in your data, you're going to want to report on them. So let's get started with a quick introduction to SAS Visual Analytics. SAS Visual Analytics is a web-based product. That means all we need is a URL to hit our Visual Analytics server with some login credentials, and we are good to go. Visual Analytics promotes large volumes of data. It is designed to use big data. And so we've all heard a lot about big data in the last couple years. But what do we do with it, and what does it really mean? Well, these are very large. There's not a specific number related to it, but they're data files that sometimes are just too large to manage, too many observations, too many columns, too many fields for us to handle in a typical environment. So we have a cloud-based environment that allows us to load these data files and do some data discovery with them. And that's our goal for this session. SAS Visual Analytics allows for you to access massive amounts of data. We can import data, and once we have the data into the Viya platform, then we can go about exploring the data, finding those data trends that we're looking for, and then creating some reports, and ultimately sharing this information. The data will be stored on a server called SAS. This is our cloud analytics services. It is very high speed. It is scalable. So if your organization maybe bought a smaller Viya environment, you can always add to it. It's resilient and it's fault tolerant. So if things happen, and things do happen, so if a node goes down or I have some sort of break in communication between my nodes, there is backup. The data is always backed up. So rest assured that your data will be there when you need it in SAS. Viya comes with two basic architecture structures. We have single machine, which is just what it sounds like. It's one machine. And then we have multi-machine. And again, this sounds like what it is, more than one machine. Typically on Viya, you'll have a multi-machine deployment. You'll have a head node, and then you'll have other nodes that communicate with each other. The head node's in charge, and it equally distributes the data among the worker nodes. And this is what we were talking about with the node-to-node communication, fault tolerance. So if one of those nodes goes down, the other nodes know that, and they kind of pick up the pace, and the head node grabs the backup data. So all of this happens very seamlessly. When we log into SAS Viya, we're going to go to the SAS drive. And the SAS drive is kind of the starting place for us. This is where we can grab our reports, maybe make some changes to how we want to store or share our information. But Visual Analytics is where we're going to spend the majority of our time. We're going to use Visual Analytics to do the data discovery piece that we're interested in. We're also going to use it to generate some quick reports. If the data needs to be cleaned at all, so maybe you have too many columns, or maybe you have a lot of missing values in a particular column, or maybe you don't have all the columns that you need, you can use SAS Data Studio to prep or clean your data. It is a separate application though. So I can use SAS Data Studio to prep or clean my data, and then I can load that clean data into SAS, and Visual Analytics can access it. The environment manager and the theme designer and the graph builder, we're not really going to focus much on. Those are generally not often used by the analyst, and that's kind of the role we're taking for this session. So you can see SAS Visual Analytics has a variety of different users. We, for this session, are going to primarily take the analyst role, and we'll be using SAS Visual Analytics. I'm sure some folks out there might be data scientists, and while you'll use SAS Visual Analytics, you'll probably spend more time in visual statistics or visual data mining and machine learning. And then we have our SAS administrators. Again, analysts might do a little bit of this, and their primary role would be to prepare the data. And we'll use SAS Data Studio for that. We then have our administrator. This class isn't really designed for administrators unless they take the role of analyst or data scientist. And in some organizations, they do. The administrator's primary role is to make sure the environment is healthy. So they can use the environment manager to look at all of those nodes that I talked about previously, to assign roles or capabilities to the users. And then we have our information consumer, and you can see they have access to visual analytics as well, but the only thing the information consumer is going to have access to is the viewing of the reports. They will not be able to edit the reports. Actually, they could maybe edit some pieces of it, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay, we are going to jump into the demonstration that gives us a quick little overview of SAS Drive. This is SAS Drive. So I've logged in, and this is where I land. And this allows for us to organize our information. We can organize our reports. We can reach all of the applications that we have access to. So in the upper left-hand corner, there's 3 horizontal lines, and I have access to all of those applications that show here in that drop-down. The centerpiece here, the upper centerpiece, is called our quick access area. So if I had some item that maybe I was going to use on a fairly frequent basis, I might want to drop it into the quick access area. So over on the far right-hand side, you'll see my login. I logged in as Eric today, and under Eric, I have 3 little dots, and those give me the menu options for this particular application. It also shows that the quick access area has been expanded. So when the arrows are pointing, up, then we have this real estate available. If you decide that there's not really anything you want to put in the quick access area, then you can minimize it and you have more area for the center canvas. So as we look through this, you can see I have some SAS videos in my folders. If I go to my shared content in the public folder, I have a couple global forum reports that I would use while I was demonstrating. If we go back and open up, if I select the little plus, it actually looks at my information and makes a suggestion as to what would be good in my quick access area based upon what I've used. Well, I've just logged in, so it doesn't actually have any recommendations for me. All right, well, we're going to move on, taking a look at some of the data visualizations that will help us understand our data better. Okay, during this session, we're going to take a look at a variety of different visualizations that will help us understand our data better. So the goal of this is to do some data discovery. Maybe we've been told there's certain issues in maybe particular locations or regions, and we want to do a little geographic analysis. Maybe someone has lots and lots and lots of distinct values and they want to have an easier way to look at them. Maybe that you need to just understand the shape of the data. Do I have a lot of missing data? Um, do I have a lot of outliers? So let's take a look at some visualizations that might help us explore our data a little bit more. So first, we have to get the data into SAS. And again, SAS is our server. It provides us access to the data. And we have a couple different tools that we could use to get data into SAS. So Environment Manager would be a way that a SAS administrator would load data. Typically, end users or analysts are not going to be loading data through Environment Manager. We may use the import function in SAS Visual Analytics, and that allows us to load the data. And we can make some report level changes to the data, but no changes that are made in SAS Visual Analytics would be actually stored with the table. They would be changes that would be stored with the report. If I want to make changes that allow me to edit the data source, then I would need to use one of the tools in the lower portion of the slide. So anything like SAS Data Studio, SAS Studio if you're a SAS programmer, SAS Enterprise Guide if you know open source, then you can use open source to make some data changes. And then you want to store that data in an area that is accessible to your analyst. So maybe you have a public folder, something that other people can get to. In Visual Analytics, we can easily import our data. So from within Visual Analytics, when we go to open a data source, we have the option to import. Once we select import, then we have the option of what type of import do we want. Is it local? Is it server-based? Is it social media data? So once we've picked the type, whether it's an Excel spreadsheet or it's a text file, or maybe it's a SAS data set, once we make our selection as to what we want to import, we'll then be presented with a little wizard that will walk us through it. Once the data gets into Visual Analytics, then it's broken down or categorized into two types. It is either categorical data or measure data. So it's character data and numeric data, just those two types. Note that in the character or category side, we see date times. So Visual Analytics uses date times as a categorical or character data when it's generating reports. Now, if we need to use the date time as a number to do a calculation, we can do that. We just need to add in one more little step so that Visual Analytics knows to use it as a number. Within Visual Analytics, we can modify lots of the properties of the data items. We can create new data items. We can add a variety of different filters. We can add filters on the data. We can add filters on an object in the report. Our goal here is to prep our data and then use that to discover some of those patterns or trends, explore relationships. We want to have a better understanding of our data. In Visual Analytics, there is a visualization called Automated Explanation. An automated explanation will go into a column and basically run as many algorithms on it that it can. So it gives me this very high level summary information about the column I selected. So here, the column that was selected was days to deliver. And then it gives me the statistics, the descriptive statistics regarding days to deliver. And then it looks at the relationship between days to deliver and other columns in the data. It also will group values based upon the average value for the days to deliver. So it goes in and it runs, like I said, a bunch of different algorithms, and then it determines what would be the most important data item to explain or understand days to deliver. So what other data item in my table is closely related to days to deliver and can provide some explanation on days to deliver. And that would be order type here. So I'm going to jump in and let's do a little demo. Okay, so we're going to take a quick look at the automatic explanation. Here I've just opened an empty report. The reason that I've opened this and I just didn't start with a new report is because the data has already been assigned to this. That way I don't have to pull in my data. Again, for the demo, I'm going to stop my video so that it doesn't hide the upper right-hand corner's options. So I would like to, first I'm going to minimize this start from a page template, which is kind of a nice thing. It'll give you some sample templates if you're not sure the best way to set up a report, but we're going to take a look at this automated explanation. So let me go into the data, and then I'm going to right-click on threat level, and let's go to edit. So basically what this did is it took a column called conservation status and created a new data item. And all of these are values for conservation status. And they all are basically not threatened species. So this data that we're looking at, it's the threat level for the species becoming extinct. So then we have ones that are threatened, and they are endangered, proposed, threatened, and then we have our extinct, which is only those that are extinct. So we've decided to create this new value, threat level, this new column, new data item, threat level, and it has possible 5 different values. So I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel because this is exactly what we wanted. We've got these 3 plus missing possibility, and species of concern is also a conservation status. So that is my threat level. And we leave the missing in there because that is species that have not been identified as a threat. They don't have a status yet, so they're not threatened or extinct. And then the other value, that species of concern, would be species that might need a proactive protection, but we don't have enough information at this point to categorize it. I would like to know which of my other data items can help explain the characteristics and the contributing factors for the threatened species. So I'm just going to go to the threat level. I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to select Explain, and I want to explain on the current page because I don't have anything on this page. So threat level is my response variable, and pretty much the other data becomes underlying factors. And let me click away from that. So you can see that the category is the other data item that can explain threat level. So let's go ahead and filter out some missing values because I think they're skewing this output. I'm going to pop over to the filters on the right-hand side. And you need to have your object selected. I'll select new filter. I'm going to filter on threat level. And I want to clear the missing values. And now you can see it recalculates and gives me a little bit different information. So now the order is going to be most closely related. And because this is a categorical data value, I can actually pick the level of the event that I want to look at. So over in the top right hand, right now we're looking at the extinct, sorry. And we could say, hey, maybe we want to look at those species that are threatened and what factors are mostly correlated to threatened species. So as we kind of look through this, we can also expand it. When we expand or maximize, we get additional information. I'm going to scroll this up a little bit. So it just gives me an overview. So what did I pick? I picked threat level. It removed or modified 5 out of those 13. It used a decision tree. And basically, that's what it's doing is here it ran 7 decision trees to see which of those underlying factors maybe played a part in understanding the threatened threat level. The threatened threat level, that's a lot. And then we can look at the screening results. So it tells you which of those columns were either ignored. Yeah, they were all, yeah, they only had ignored ones. And then we have the relative importance tab. And the higher or closer to the number 1, the more important that underlying factor is. And so we can see order is the closest. So that would be the additional data item that best explains the threat level. And again, we're looking at the threat level of threatened. So let's minimize this back up. So here the threat level has a 12.48% chance of being threatened. So it's the second most common threat level. But we can pick other ones if we're interested to see what part they play. So you can see how much park name played a part. Let's go look at category. So you can see the relationship between the threat level and then that second underlying factor for category. So each bar is split to show that portion of the level that has the threatened species, which is the orange bars. And then the portion that's non-threatened is the gray. And we can see that the vascular plant is the most threatened. And then when we come down and look at the groups, it tells us that certain vascular plants, where in Hawaii, have an 82% chance of being threatened. Again, they're using decision trees to run this. Here is order. And we can, if we're interested, we can derive a data item, a new data item out of this. Let's go back to category. And we're going to pick this high. And let's derive a group item. Oh, and then it's going to put it in our data pane. And it did it twice because I clicked it twice. So let me go remove it. There we go. All right. So here's my derived data item. And then this should have only 2 values, whether the species is in or out of that group. So it's either in or out of the category. So let's take a look at the species that have a high chance of being threatened. We're going to go and pick the park name. Let's clear this. Pick the park name and common names. And let's add those to the new page, to a new page. It's just going to give me a listing. And then this is all of them, right? But I'm going to use that new derived data item to filter out only those that are threatened. So I'm going to select the new filter. I'm going to use it on this threat level. And then I'm going to clear the outs. I'll clear the missings as well. So now I get a listing of all of those common names for the items, and they should all be in that threat, in the threatened threat level. Okay, so automated explanation is a great tool to learn a little bit more about your data. And we are going to continue with our data exploration by taking a look at some charts and graphs. Okay, so let's continue in our data discovery and use some charts and graphs to understand more about our data. So we have a variety of different data sources or data items in our data source that we can use to learn more about the data. So again, maybe we want to do some sort of location analysis. We want to, see where our customers are located, or maybe you're doing some sort of factory analysis. You want to know where all the plants are located. The previous example was park data, so maybe I want to know where all of my national parks are located. So lots of different options for continent or data and location analysis. We also want to focus on profits, so we're going to be interested in which product line is returning the greatest profits, and we have some other categorical data items that we're going to focus on as well. One of the really nice things about visual analytics is the automatic chart. So in the previous example, I selected two columns and dragged those over to a new page. It created a list table. So visual analytics looks at the data that you've selected, and when you drag it over, it picks the best fit. Here we have a categorical data item, and it happens to be a geography item. So when we drag it over, it's going to build a map for us. The second example is a handful of measures. When you select only measures, it looks at the cardinality of the data, which is the uniqueness. So do I have a lot of unique values? If so, it's probably going to generate a heat map. Otherwise, it's going to generate a correlation matrix, which is what we see here. The listing is the detailed level data. So we just saw a listing. I dragged over my park and species information, and it listed them out. Every single row in the data that met that, well, I added a filter, but every single row of the data would get returned before you filter it. A crosstab is summarizing that information. So maybe I want to summarize my data up by location or product type or gender. So you want to have a categorical data item that drives the summary information. So this is like a by column. So I'm summing this up by the continent name. When we're looking at the measures in the data, so the numeric data, often we want to look at the spread of the data. So a histogram does a great job for a single measure. So this shows me the spread of my numeric value quantity, and you can see the majority of the data is, in this 3 or under, and then the further out, our tail gets smaller and smaller and smaller. On the right-hand side, we have a box plot. This is another great way to look at the variability of the data. It also provides us with the extreme values. This particular data had a lot of outliers, so many that it couldn't use a bubble to display them. It needed to use the gray boxes, and that's just because there were so many outliers. It couldn't just use bubbles. They would have all been laying on top of each other. So it used the shading scheme to do this. bar charts are a great way to explain your data. So here we have a variety of different bar charts. We can have vertical bar charts, we can have horizontal bar charts, we can have stacked bar charts. And we can use it for a variety of different information. So nominal values mean there's no specific order to them. Later on, we'll take a look at ordinal values, which means the data does have an order. Something like small, medium, large would be considered ordinal. Then we have our time series data that obviously needs a date time value. We can rank our data, and we'll take a look at that in a little bit. And then we can also do stacked bar charts that normalize to 100%, so we get parts of a whole. So let's jump into demo and take a look at using our auto chart. Okay, so you should be looking at my SAS drive, and we're going to go ahead and start a new report. So let's go to the new, oops, not there, up here, and pick the Explore and Visualize. Okay, again, I'm going to stop the video. We're going to start with some data. So we're just basically creating a new report. So the first thing we need to do is go get some data, and I'm looking for my products table. So I might have to drill into this data, and then there we go. Products clean is the data source I'm looking for. It's available, but not currently in memory. So over on the far right-hand side, I'm going to click the little lightning bolt to load that into memory. And as soon as my OK is done in the bottom, then I know it's ready. That was quick. We'll select OK. So now we have our products data source. And lots of columns. Kind of quickly scroll through those. So you can see I have some XY if I wanted to do some geography stuff, lots of categorical data. And we don't really know anything about this data, so we're going to take a quick look at it. But let's just talk about the interface for a minute. On the left-hand side, we have the data icon where we can go grab our data. Then these are all the possible objects we could use in our report. We also have some suggest, and suggest is a really cool attribute of Visual Analytics. When I select suggest, it goes into the data and it picks basically some suggestions that might benefit you to display your data. The outline basically is just an outline. It shows me everything that's in my report. Right now, it would be empty because I don't have anything in the report. On the right-hand side, if we look all the way over to the right-hand side, we see options, and this has to do with the object. So right now, these are sort of generic options. Roles also have to do with an object. We can set up actions. We can do some display rules, so maybe set some parameters on how to color values, add filters, and add ranks. And we'll take a look at all those throughout the class. So I would like to create a list table. I'm going to go to my objects, and I'm going to take the list table and drop it into the center. And then I would like to add all of my columns. So I'm going to go over to the add in the roles, and I'm just going to select them all. Down my shift key and select OK. This will take a second because there are a fair amount of columns. So the listing just shows us all of the observations. It's going to stop. Let's see if I go to my You can override the system data limit. I think it's 40,000, but it definitely will exceed it. So it's basically giving you a little sample of all of the observations. So I'm going to scroll through this. It's sorted by city name, so we'll see all the missing observations first. And I just switch the sort. Again, this is a lot of data. Okay, so there we can see our cities in descending sort order so that we don't see all those missings first. All right, so I want to focus on profit, but as I scroll through this, I don't see that I have a profit. So that seems like something we're going to need to create. I do have cost and I do have retail price. So let's maybe start looking with those. Let's go to the data icon and we'll look at the cost and retail price by the order type. So I'm going to select order type, and then I'm going to select cost, and I'm going to select retail price. And then I'm just going to right click on any one of these gray areas, and we're going to add it to a new page. So I'm on page 2, and now I'm looking at the cost versus the retail price for each order type. So we have 3 order types. You can buy stuff in stores. You can order items via the catalog. You could order things on the internet. All right, so let me give this a name. We'll go over into objects. You need to make sure that the object that you're working with has been selected. So there is a little black, faint black box around my object. And I'm just going to give this a better name than bar order type. So cost and retail price by order type. And then I think we'll turn off the automatic title. So we'll select no title. Gives us a little bit more space. You may have noticed the bars just all shifted up. So if we go look at the roles now that we have an object, you should see a variety of different roles. When I showed that to you previously, there wasn't anything in there because I didn't have an object, and each object has its own set of roles. So here you can see our category is order type. We have 2 measures. You can add many more. We could group it. Lattice columns means that they're like individual charts that sort of lay next to each other, sharing an axis, and then the rows are just the other direction. We can add data tip values. So this is my data tip. When I hover, it tells me that this is the cost and retail price for retail sale. So maybe there was another factor that I would just like to know, but I don't want it to, we'll select frequency. I don't want it to modify or impact the actual graph. So here, nothing's changed except frequency is now added on to the data tip. So again, this is your data tip value. We can also animate it. We'll see animation a little bit later. And then you can have hidden roles. So maybe you would like a value to basically do the opposite of the data tip is I don't want that data item to show up, but I do want it to impact the graph. So we can talk about those in a little bit as well. Okay, so let's go and take a look at creating some new data items and applying filters. So creating data items. You can see there's a little dashed line going down on this slide. The items to the left can be created in Visual Analytics or using the data prep tool, so SAS Data Studio, or if you know SAS code, you can use Enterprise Guide, SAS Studio, not Data Studio, but SAS Studio if you know how to write code. We can also create them within Visual Analytics. The other ones on the right-hand side can only be created in Visual Analytics. So I can't create a geography data item in Enterprise Guide. So these are items that need to be created in Visual Analytics. So let's just take a quick look through these. We have calculated data items, and that would just be line by line. Every observation comes in and a calculation is performed. So you can see the salary comes in, it gets an increase, and there's a new salary written out. But sometimes what I want to do is do this calculation on a group. And that would be an aggregated measure. So here I'm going to sum up all the US salaries, and then I'm going to sum up all of the UK salaries. And then I can do a calculation to look at what percent of my salaries fall to the US and what percent fall to the UK. So that would be an aggregated measure because I'm grouping it first and then I'm doing the calculation. We can also create custom categories. We have a point and click tool within Visual Analytics to do it. So earlier when I showed threat level and we went into edit and we looked at the different categories for threat level, those new categories had been created using a custom category. I could also use code. I could do some Boolean logic to create it. They produce the same results. So whether you want the point and click or you're going to write some code with a new calculated data item, either way, it's going to produce the same output. Now, filtering data, we've got a couple different options. So filtering the data as the report designer means that I'm going to filter maybe on input. So I might want to filter the data when it comes in. If you do a data source filter, then it will filter the data and update those distinctive counts. So when we looked at the data pane, all of the categorical values had a number after them, and that is the number of distinct counts. So if I add a data source filter, those numbers will be updated. I can also do them in the right pane, and we saw that earlier as well as I removed some missing values, and that would be a basic filter. Now, I could also do one on the right pane that would be considered an advanced filter, and that might be a filter that uses some comparison logic or some expression-based filter that would be considered advanced. We can also do post-aggregate filters, meaning I group my data, I sum it up, and then I add the filter. So the filter would be on the grouped data. And these are all options when you're the report designer. When I'm the report viewer, meaning just the information consumer, I have different level of filters that are available. And we'll talk about those a little bit later. So we can do some location analysis by using our geomap. We can do coordinates. We can do region coordinates. These are both useful when I have an even distribution of my data. So because the region coordinates are plotting at a central point, so it's picking one spot. So here, all of these are very clustered in, but it's a center point of each state. You really want to, because it's presenting information for a region, you want to have the average value for that region. If we have very dense data, we might want to switch to a contour map. And again, we can do just region maps if we have, we can do unique regions if we have polygons or shape files. So within Visual Analytics, you're provided with a handful of generic name or code lookups. So country names or codes, state providence names or codes, U.S. state abbreviations or names, and then U.S. postal codes. They all come with. They're all predefined. If I have my longitude and latitude, then I can do custom geography data items. So, what is the longitude and latitude of, every university? And then I could plot that. If I have those shape files, if I have a polygon provider, I can then load those shape files and use that geographic data provider to do unique regions or, something that needs to be outside the scope of these default locations. So maybe you want to do school districts. Anything that would have its own unique area, you would need a shape file for. Hierarchies are a great way to nest your data. So we're going to start at the top level, the value with the least number of distinct values, and kind of work our way down to the most detailed level of the data. So in the end, month will be rolled into quarter and quarter will be rolled into year. So I may have 4 years of data, so I'd have 4-year values. When I drill in, I would then see the quarter for each one of those years. And if I drill again to the next level, I will see the months of the quarters for that year. This is a great way to display a lot of data. So you could have massive amounts of data stored in a hierarchy, and the viewer is only going to see the data that they've selected. So they're only going to see the data that they've drilled into and expanded. All right, so let's take a look how we can create some new data items. Okay, so we're going to create some new data items. I'm just going to add a new page and start kind of with a fresh slate here. And I would like to create a new geography data item based upon the continent name. So I'm going to go to the data icon on the left-hand side. And then I see the continent name. Oops, that's supplier continent. Let's do the right one. There we go. And I've got this little drop down. So I'm going to select this to edit the properties. Tells me that it's continent name. That's correct. I want to modify the classification though to geography. So continent name stays. We could edit and modify this if we want. But let's drop down to the geography data. We're not going to use any of the lookup codes. We're actually going to do a custom. So we're going to select longitude and latitude in data. And so in my data, when I drop down, I have an XY for latitude and an XY for longitude. So let's match them up. XY continent lat, and then XY continent long. And it shows me 100% of my data was mapped. So I should have 5 geography data items because I had 5 different continent names. And you can see from this tiny little screenshot that it's mapping it into the center. So here's Africa, and it maps it into the center of Africa. I'm going to select OK. So let's go ahead and create another geography data item with country. So here's my country. Again, drop down to edit properties. Switch this to geography. And then we're going to keep the name. It is using one of the lookups, and it happens to be using the very first lookup. Here are some of the other lookups, though. So if this was those 2-letter ISO codes or states, but it happens to be the country or region names, and I am 100% mapped. This is a winning strategy. I'm going to select OK. So within this, I'd also like to create one more, which is my US state names. So I'll go to state name and I'll drop down and we'll switch this to to geography. I'm going to actually change the name of this one though and call this US state names. Oops. And we are going to use a geographic name or lookup, but we're going to use our US state names. And you can see only 19% of my data got mapped here. And it shows me just a little bit of the listing of the unmapped values. So we have this geographic data from all over the world, but we also have just these US state names. And so I'm going to need to add a filter just to focus on the United States, but we'll leave it as is now. And actually, I guess they don't want me to add US. I'm going to try to follow with the demo script. So let's leave it as is, and I'll select OK. And then finally, we're going to grab the postal code, do the same drop down, geography, postal code, and then locate those US zip codes. And we see the same thing. Only a portion of our data gets mapped, and that is because we're looking at data from all over the world, and we're going to fix that. But let's just select OK. So let's take a look at creating a hierarchy. We're going to go to our new data item, select hierarchy, and then we're going to call this location, and we're going to drag over those values. So continent at the top, then country. Within country, we want states, and within states, we want postal codes. So I'll select OK, and then let's deploy this in a geomap. So I'll go to my objects, and I scroll down, and there's actually a whole category for geographic, and I'm going to create the coordinate map. So it builds that map, but you can see I don't have any data assigned. So over on the right-hand side, I can assign my data. I could also pick it from here too. So you can drag and drop them. When I do that, you see that location gets populated. So these are all of my, they're not that large, but you can see my bubbles. And then just to take a look at the geography hierarchy, as I drill into Europe, take a look in the upper left-hand corner. We have sort of trailing, these are sometimes called breadcrumbs, and then that lets you drill through this. And you can always switch. There we go, switch to North America. And you can see, this is my point about it, putting it in the center. So when I drill into this, those states the dot gets put in the center. And this is why we would want to be representing, say, an average value for Nevada. And we can go back to the top level by just selecting the all. All right, so let's add some more data to this because that's just looking at the frequency. So we're going to add in the discount. See what size discount we're giving for each location. And obviously, and we need another one, retail price. So this discount is a little odd. And I'm going to go take a look at this because that seems like a weird thing to me. So when I see something like that, I'm like, usually I need to go investigate. So We're going to take a look at the properties, and I see that the aggregation is the sum. So what this is doing is it's taking every average and summing them up together, meaning if I had 10 stores and one store was doing a 5%, another store was doing a 10%, and then another 5, it would be adding them up. So I'd be at 20% at this point. And that doesn't really make sense. I probably want an average discount. So I'm going to change this to average. And then I probably want to rename it too. And let's double check what's going on with retail price as well. And that is doing the sum as well. So this is the total retail price in millions for the entire area. Again, I think average would be better. So average retail price tells a little bit better of a story. So let's go back. You can see the largest discounts are in Asia and Africa. And you'll also see later down the road that they have the lowest profits. So a little bit of a problem there. But let's take a look at North America, and we'll double click this. And then I have my Canada and the United States. So we can drill into the United States and then throughout the United States. And I'm just going to zoom in a little, just using my mouse. Zoom in. There we go. So it looks like South Dakota is giving a really big discount, but it has a really low average. In fact, it might be the lowest average retail price. So, you know, places that are trying to move products maybe aren't bringing in as much money because they have to get a big discount to sell it. So let's take a look at Texas. I'm going to double click Texas. And these, and now let me zoom again. These are all of the zip codes for Texas. And maybe I'm interested in Austin, Texas. So if I knew Texas really well, I might be able to expand and drill in the Austin area. But in the upper left-hand corner, we have a pin that allows us to search for a value. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to select a little pin, and then I'll just start typing Austin, and it should pop up. And there's Austin, Texas. So it drops the pin for Austin, Texas. Maybe I would like to look at the 50 miles around Austin. So there is an arrow that gives me more options. One of them is the geographic selection. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to look at not 5 miles around Austin, but I want to look at 50 miles around Austin. There we go. And let's draw the selection. So now this shows me all of the zip codes in the 50-mile radius around Austin, Texas. We could even go in and filter this. So if we wanted to do a new filter, now it's built a filter, and over on the right-hand side, if I go to the filters and I hover, these are all the zip codes in a 50-mile radius from Austin, Texas. Pretty cool. All right, we have a little bit more to cover. So let's pop back to our slides. Okay, so let's take a look at our last section in the data visualizations by investigating some data analysis visualizations. So we have some graphs that are a little more analytic in nature. The bubble plot allows for 3 measures. So we have our X, our Y, and then the size, or the Z. In general, we want to also have a categorical value to summarize this information. Otherwise, the bubble plot is going to attempt to display a bubble for every single observation in your data source, which is probably not a good idea. The tree map is also a really great way to display categorical data with two measures. So here we can see the color is the number of orders. So it looks like clothes with the most number of orders. And then the size is based on profit. So outdoors generated a higher profit, but not as many orders. And we'll take a look at using these. We can also use a correlation matrix. This is going to allow me to use up to 60 measures, and it will look at the relationships between the measures. And it gives you additional information in the analysis section, so you can take a look at those relationships. We also can use a scatter plot. Scatter plots are only going to be useful when you have two measures. We have a heat map, and a heat map is great when you have high cardinality measures. So cardinality means that there's a lot of distinct values. So something like ID would have high cardinality. Maybe retail price could have high cardinality if it's actually looking at every single retail price, not the sum of the retail prices. So depending upon, here we're looking at total revenue and unit cost, lots of distinct values. So it's going to use the heat map to display that information. We can also use a category in here as well. We can add fit lines to scatter plots and heat maps, and by default it will plot a linear fit, which would be nice if all of our data was linear. So as unit cost rises, so does total revenue. Unfortunately, not all data fits that. So you do have the option to use best fit, and best fit will then select the most appropriate model and display that fit line. You can see all of our options here. If we have time data, so time series plots are great. We can also just use a line chart to look at data over time. So a line chart also is great for ordinal data. I mentioned earlier that we would take a look at some ordinal data. So this is customer age group. There is a specific order in this data. So that is why we call it ordinal data. We have the youngest to the oldest versus the nominal data, which meant there's no relationship between the categorical values. So something like states would be nominal. We can also do forecasting. So forecasting is pretty cool. It takes a look at the historical data, and based on that historical data, it builds a model. It takes that model and applies it to the data in both the historical observations and the predicted observations. So when it applies the model back to the historical data, it's called a hindcast. And so on this slide, you can see we have a few outliers in the hindcast, but generally it's pretty close for the predicted model. As we look to the actual predicted values, it's a pretty tight band, and this band is your confidence interval. Well, probably it looks like maybe about 3 months out, that band starts to get much larger, and this means it's less sensitive. So the blue shaded area is the confidence interval, which is saying that it predicts a future value, say in May of 2014, would fall anywhere, and you can hover and it'll tell you the upper point and the lower point. So the wider the band, the less sensitive or precise the forecast is. Let's take a look at using some of these visualizations. All right. So we're just going to add a new page. Click the little plus next to page 3. Let's take a look at some of our measured data. I'm going to go to my data icon, and we want costs to be average costs. So let me clear that selection and drop down next to cost. Sorry about that, clicked outside. Here we go. And let's change it from sum to average. So instead of total, we're going to have it be average cost. And let's do the same for quantity. Make sure I've got, change the name here so it's better representation. Okay, and we're going to start with a correlation matrix. I'm going to select average cost, average discount, average quantity, and average retail price. And I'm going to just drag those over and release them. And because they're measures, it's going to go ahead and do a correlation matrix. And if I hover, the darker the blue or the brighter the blue is a stronger relationship, and it tells me that the correlation is 0.779. So as average cost increases, so does retail price. If I want to learn more about this relationship, I can expand this and take a look at how it compares to all the other ones. So I would like to do a little further analysis of this. So I'm going to select it, and I'm going to do a right click, and I'm going to select a new object from selection, and I'm going to look at a heat map. So it's hard to see the heat map. I'm going to drag it to the right-hand side. There we go. So when I look at this heat map, I immediately am noting that I have this one very, very, very dark blue bar or bright blue bar. So it has a really high frequency. It's got 265,186 observations fall in this 1250 to 3750 range, and a retail price of negative 100 to a positive 100. So I'm not sure that's great for my business. I have a losing value. Also, let's change the fit line. This does not look linear to me. I'm going to right click, select fit line, and switch it to best fit. And it should update. Huh. It should update. That is not, I'm going to do it myself then. Oh, I think we want to switch. Sorry, guys. Let's switch. Let's go to the roles, and I want to switch these. There we go. Now we're looking at it. So here's our cubic fit. That's because we want to see how, when average retail price increases, what happens with average costs, and we can see that goes up as well. All right, sorry about that. Well, that brings us to the end of the data discovery piece, and we're going to quickly demonstrate some reporting options. So the focus of our session was really on data discovery, but without introducing reporting in visual analytics, you would be missing a lot. So let's take a look at creating a simple report and then adding some options that can make your report interactive. So in designing your reports, you want to keep in mind a few things. You want it to be easy to navigate. So add things like descriptions and instructions. You want it to be attractive. So be careful of the colors. Multiple pages is great. You do not want to overcrowd a page. And then you want to use a variety of the different actions and tasks that are available so that your report is versatile. A lot of times people overdo it with a report, so keep in mind um, that your report should be appropriate for the audience. Not everybody will understand the data like you do as a designer. Also, you want it to tell a single story. If you feel like you're going off into kind of tangents or sidebars, you might want to create a second report or a hidden page, which we'll talk about, to showcase that additional information. And then you want to keep it visually appealing. I know there's lots of different objects available, but if you can tell the story with the most basic object, maybe a bar graph, then that would be the best object to use, even though we have a lot of really fun visualizations. So let's just take a look at this idea here about graphs for reporting. I have a word cloud and a donut or pie chart. Word clouds are very popular and appealing. People love donut charts or pie charts. There's a little bit of a question here as to, is this really the best way to display the data? So here, Madrid and London are very, very close in size. And I would be hard-pressed to pick which one had more, I'm pretty sure this is frequencies, but pick which one had more values. And then we have a similar situation over here on the order type. You know, which is larger, catalog sale or internet sale? We can always expand the objects to look at the table, but we really want our consumers to be able to understand the story at a quick glance. And sometimes, even if they are a very popular object, they may not be the best object for our data. So it's very difficult to compare the relative size in slices of the pie charts. We have lots of dual axes options, and these are fantastic when you have measures with different ranges. So we have percentages, and then we have millions, totals, values here. Here we have a count of employees, and then the facility efficiency rate, inches for the rainfall, temperature in Fahrenheit. So you can see lots of different options to display the data when you have different measures. So let's take a quick look at this and create a simple report. Okay, so we're going to start a new report. I kind of like to start and stop on my home or SAS Drive page. So I'll go to my drop down and select the Explore and Visualize. And this was that last report, but I want to create a new report. So over in the far right-hand corner, I will select New. So now I need to go grab my data. Again, I'm going to use that products table. So products clean and select OK to add that data in. Because I'm generating a report, I may want custom titles. So I'm going to go ahead and add that as an option on my ID. So in the far right-hand corner, when I select the E, I'm logged in as Eric, and I'm going to select my settings. Within the settings, I would like to go to General. And as I scroll through this, I get to the titles. And I would like to set this to custom title so that because I'm in the report side, I want to just make this a little more user-friendly. I want to make it easier for my consumer to understand. So we made some changes back to the data in the previous report. Those changes do not get carried over unless I save them as a data view, which we didn't. So I'm going to just make a couple quick changes here. I want to change the aggregation of retail price to average. And then I also want to update the name average retail price. And I'm going to start with a pie chart. So we'll go to the objects, and I'll locate my pie chart and drag that over. I'm going to go ahead and add in the order type. So I'll expand the add and select order type. So right now this is the frequency. So if I hover, the majority of my data comes from the retail sales, and it shows me that there were 715,970 observations for retail sales. Well, instead of the frequency, I'd actually like to look at that average retail price. So I'm going to select the frequency under the measure to replace it, and now I'll select average retail price. So now I have these three sections which, are kind of hard to tell apart, but if we expand this, we can then see that those values are quite close. The retail sale, while it had the most observations, it has the lowest average price. So the purple is a bit lower than the internet or catalog. Let's make a couple more changes to this. And over here in the untitled section, I can add in my own. Actually, let's replace untitled. Okay, so average retail price for order type is going to be my new title. So as I mentioned, pie charts are not the best visualization for values that are close together. So let's change this. In the upper right-hand corner, I have these three dots, upper right-hand corner of the object. I have three dots, and change pie to is one of those, and it recommends a bar chart. So now it creates the bar chart, and I can tell this is much clearer that retail price is less than catalog sale, and catalog sale is less than internet, but that was very hard to tell in the pie chart. I'm going to go ahead and just name the object itself. So let's go here to our, and we're just going to call this order type. This is just the object name. We still have the title in there. And then we can clear the axes because we know what that is. We know that that's order type. So let's clear that axes label and clear that axes label. Just gives us a little bit more real estate for the report. Okay, so that's the beginning. We are just going to do a simple report to start, and then we're going to talk about making this report interactive. So let's pop over to our next section. So we just created a very basic report with a bar chart. We're going to talk about things that we can add to that report to make it interactive. One of the new things in version 8.5 of Visual Analytics is viewer customization. So I mentioned earlier that the information consumer can only view the report, and then I said, well, maybe they can make some changes. So as the report designer, you get to decide at what level do you want your viewer to be able to make changes. So the default is comprehensive edits, and comprehensive edits means that it could alter the report in a meaningful way. So I could change an object type. So currently we have the bar chart. If I come in and I have comprehensive edits, I could make it a line chart. I can turn it back to that pie chart. So you want to be careful about this default. Simple edits lets them make changes but not impact the original intent of the report. And then data edits has the most impact because they could even change data for certain objects in the report. So by default, they can change objects and again, change the intent of the report. And you get to set this up and decide what you want your viewers to be able to do. So typically my report will have multiple pages. You want each page to tell a story or focus on a single idea, limit the number of objects on any given page, limit the number of pages. If it looks like you're having 7, 8 pages, you might want to think about having a second report that you could link to the report so that the initial report is not so overwhelming. We can also use hidden pages. Hidden pages are pages that only show up by a prompt, meaning if I make a selection in the bar chart, then my hidden page will load. Hidden pages are fantastic to provide additional information. We can also filter data from the viewer's perspective, meaning I can set this up so that my viewer can make selections at the report level, at the page level. We can set up interactions between objects so they could filter them. We can set up links so that one page opens another page, or a selection will take you to a URL. So you've got lots of different interactive options. When we set up these prompts, we have some choices of the different types of prompts. We can do a list control, which allows multiple selections. We can use a range slider. That's good for numbers and or dates. Button bars are great when you have just a few distinct values. This is a toggle, meaning I make the selection, it filters everything based on that selection. If I click the selection again, it clears it. Drop-down list. So if I have a lot of distinct values, then I might want this smart type drop-down list. So I start to type and it shows me all the possible values with those characters. And then we could just have a drop down, and this is useful when you have a moderate number. What does moderate mean? It's really subjective. I mean, you could have a drop down list with 10 items. You could have a drop down list with 50 items. It's whatever you think is reasonable. I think 50 is a bit much. I would probably not have a drop down list with more than 20 or 30 items. But again, that's subjective. Page prompts and report prompts allow your viewer to make selections. If the prompt is at the report level, so it's above the page, then it will impact everything in the report. This report only has one page, but if it had multiple pages, those selections, Europe and Plush, would be limiting or filtering all the objects on all of the pages. So this also has some embedded objects that are filtering. But because these report objects filter everything, they also filter the other control objects. So you can see that we're only getting European countries. And for the product, we're only seeing plushes. We've added in this additional range slider to limit our customer satisfaction range. And then we can make a selection on a country, and we can make a selection on a plush object. All right, so let's add in a demo and demonstrate this to you. Okay, so I want to change the viewer customization level, or at least take a look at that. On my options, if I expand general, and I scroll through this, viewer customization is towards the bottom. And then you can see the default level is these comprehensive edits. And that means that they can change reports, which might make a change in the story that you're telling. And we've actually decided to give them data edit. And that is the most powerful, and it allows them to even change data. So lots of capabilities here. All right, let's start a new page, and this applies to the whole report, that customization. And because we are On the report side, we're going to name this. Earlier, we were just adding pages. So page 2 is going to be named Supplier Analysis. And page 1 is going to be named, there we go, Order Analysis. Okay, so let's go to our supplier analysis page. I'm going to go ahead and add a dual axes bar chart to our supplier analysis page. So I'm going to go ahead and add order month. Click on the category, select add, and we have order month, 12 months. That seems right. And then we want to look at the average retail price and the average amount ordered, average quantity ordered. And it looks like maybe starting here in April, but look at these months, they're not in order. So we want to sort that. I'm going to right click and I'm going to select sort, and I want to sort it in ascending order. All right, now let's look at this average retail price. Looks like the fall we're doing okay. I'm surprised that we're not making more money in December, and the first quarter we seem to be doing pretty good. And then in the summer, not so great. We're not making as much money, but people are ordering a lot of stuff. All right, so let's continue with creating our interactive report. And I want to add a bubble plot to this. I'm going to go to my objects and select bubble plot and just sort of drop that to the left. Then we need to go assign some data. So we want to create our x-axis with the cost, and then our average retail price. And for the size, we're going to use the average quantity ordered. And so down in the far right-hand corner, I have this I, and it's basically saying too many values were returned. So it's just too much data. I want to look at this by city. So if I go and I add in city name, it's still going to try to create over 10,000 bubbles. I think there's like 10,500 different cities. And so it'll spin here. It might even return kind of a super crowded bubble plot, but usually it just returns an error. Let's give that a sec. And so it has attempted to plot all of those bubbles, which is kind of crazy. I want to just look at the top 10 cities. So I'm going to go over to my ranks, and I should have done this first, but I want to show you what happens because it's not always obvious to us when we're first playing with the data what would happen. And so I like to demo it, and I'm really, I know it takes a little bit, you got to sit there and wait, but you're only going to do this once and you're going to realize like, oh, it's trying to plot a bubble for every single distinct city. And if I go to the data, let me scroll up for a sec, and I hover, it tells me there are 10,507 distinct cities. So now it's tried to display 10,507 bubbles. So let's put a rank on this. Over on the ranks side, in the ranks tab, I'm going to select new rank, and I'm going to go grab city name, and I want to see the top 10, but I would like to see the top 10 by product ordered or quantity ordered. So let's give this a second. and change this to average quantity ordered. And it's going to update. I also would like to look at this over the year. So I'm going to go to my roles and scroll down and select animation. And we want to look at this over the year. So now I have this play button, and I can see how the sales has tracked over the year for each city. Maybe, let me pause this. Maybe I'm interested in London. That is my red bubble, and I'll select play. Now I can see how all the other bubbles have interacted with London over the last year. All right, let's continue making this interactive. I'm going to go to my order analysis tab, and I want to go ahead and add in a page prompt. So let's drop down to expand our area, expand page controls. So we could do report controls or page controls. We're going to do a page control here, which opens up this little bit of real estate at the top where it says drop a data item or a control item to create a page prompt. But if I wanted it at the report level, I would have to go over to the options in the far right-hand corner, and then I could expand report controls, or I could just expand everything if I was interested. But I'm happy with this page prompt, so I'm going to go and drop some data on it. And we can just drop our, whoops, try this one more time. You want to drag this until it says auto control. So down here it's creating an auto chart, but up here it's doing auto control. And so now when I click on internet sale, I'm only going to see my internet sales. And then when I click, it clears it. All right, so this is a nice, quick, interactive report. And I hope that there are some takeaways from this that enhance your visual analytics usage. And thanks.